Good, good evening, everyone, and welcome to EduTALK. EduTALK is a weekly virtual talk show created out of the need for a global learning community, focused on topics in education that directly impact Caribbean nations and the diaspora nationals working across the globe. EduTALK features teachers, principal administrators, business leaders, and dignitaries who share their expertise on critical topics facing education today with a common goal of moving education forward and our students upward. I am your host. I'm Dr. Dwayne Dice. I'm the CEO and founder of Education Solutions International. And I'm joined by my co-host, distinguished, I should say, co-host Dr. Barker, who is over there in England. And of course, our special guest, Dr. Colette Young. And this is our New Year series still. We're trying to do this for the first 2 weeks of January or 3 weeks of January, and then we get into a regular groove of things. But we want to feature people who are making moves, and Dr. Young is making moves. Dr. Barker, before we talk to Dr. Young, just let everyone hear your voice for the new year, please. Because we're just coming back, for EduTalk.
I'm sure one of their New Year's resolution would be that they didn't hear my voice
Yes.
this year. So, but no, Happy New Year to all our listeners. Happy New Year to all the educators who have contributed to EduTalk in the last year and looking to continue to contribute to EduTalk this year. Happy New Year to everyone who has learned something, applied something, and benefited from some of the nuggets of information that we have had. And hopefully this year, we'll continue to contribute and add value to education overall. We are not just EduTalk, but we are also EduAction. So I'm really, really pleased to meet our distinguished guest, esteemed guests, quite clearly, quite mobile guest, Dr. Colette Young. So I look forward to the conversation, and hopefully we again, there's a lot of benefit for anyone listening in. So.
Yeah. So
welcome to the show, Dr.
yeah.
Young.
Thank you for having me. I'm really
Yes.
excited.
Of course. So guys, viewers, Dr. Young is the newly appointed assistant director at the Summer Principals Academy at Teachers College Columbia, and we're going to get her to say a little bit more about her at this point. So Dr. Young, tell us about you. About share a little bit about you, then we get into your leadership.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Young, I guess. I currently am at Teachers College Columbia University as the assistant director to the Summer Principals Academy. So, our program recruits, the best in the country, in the world, to come to be trained as principals, superintendents, anyone who really wants to go into leadership in the public and charter school sector. So it's a really amazing program. Being at a tier one university, you're getting faculty who are doing the research, who are there making moves, the ones who are putting out the journals and what people are following because they're looking for the best. They're looking and researching and getting evidence-based information to make sure that we're moving education hopefully in the correct direction. So as my role there, I help, I have different parts. I coordinate the whole program. So I do recruitment, I do logistics for running everything that goes on. I also teach for the program as well. So I'm going to be teaching a decision making class with one of the other faculty. So I'll go and do that. The cohort is actually, we have one in New York and one in New Orleans. So I work for the New York cohort as the kind of administrator. And then when our programs go in the summer, I will be teaching. So just to kind of give a little background, part of our unique part of this program is that you go to classes in the summer and then you do an internship in between. And that allows individuals to continue working, but then also get like hands-on experience in an area, in an environment that they're familiar with, and that they know where, there are changes that need to be made. So it's a really unique way. It's also a cohort model, which is very different from many of the other programs that are out there. Yeah, so that's kind of
Yeah.
what I do in a summary nutshell. Kind of a few side gigs, I guess, to kind of also that kind of make it also kind of fun. Outside of that, I'm the assistant coach to the Columbia University cheerleading team, and then I also teach for the music department as well. I do a solo ensemble class with one of the other lecturers in the department. So yeah,
Oh,
that's
yes.
yep.
Dr.
Kind of
Barker, you see, I told you she is very well established there.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like Dr. Young has many strings to her bow.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thanks. I have good people that I'm working with. I also went to school with Dr. Dice, so we've had some good collaborations, and I'm lucky to meet other people who are interested in doing the work of education and pushing things forward.
Well, one of the things we know is that you've just described almost the next step in your educational journey, but every journey begins with a step. So I suppose one of the things that our listeners would be very interested in learning about is when you look back in your life, what would you say represented the first step that you took that got you to where you are now in education?
That's a great question. I think growing up, school was really hard for me. I actually had I had a late diagnosis of dyslexia, so I didn't do very well in school. I mean, it was really challenging, but I was very lucky to have parents who could be very supportive in providing me with tutoring, other coaches to help me, overcome this disability. And I think learning those techniques, I was able to take that with me and share that with others. And I saw being able to help people who are having struggles be successful was very rewarding. I think, if I look at our education system, I think it's very it's very siloed right now. The big focus is math and English, and I think there's so many more skills that are so important. There's communication, how do we bring students into topics. So I think for me, as someone who was very interested in many topics and not necessarily the strongest in school, was quite pivotal. So I think later on, when I actually ended up doing my dissertation, my focus was looking at STEAM education: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, combined with the arts. And the arts are something that I've grown up with and are so important, which is kind of that background that I was coming in with. But I also knew, making it as an artist can be very challenging as well. But I think I figured out, art is a way that brings people in. Art and music, it's a connector. It's kind of, they say music is the universal language of the world. And I think being able to use that to connect to different aspects of life was really important. So when I did my dissertation, I looked at, how are teachers creating, how are they putting it out to the students, and then how are they, evaluating and revising it to bring it back to make it better. So, during the pandemic, it was really interesting because everyone had to be home and we didn't have supplies. Like we couldn't, hand out triple beam balances to students. And at the time I was teaching science. So my colleague and I were like, okay, we still need to teach this information. They're still going to need to know it. The world will move on even after COVID is over. So we figured out, why don't we have them design a balance? You can have different models that are very simple that can still do the work of that. And then we thought about, not every country is so lucky to be affording even just kind of what we consider basic school supplies. Or sometimes you may be in a third world country where you might need to figure out, how much medication do you need to administer to someone, and how are you going to make a difference. So we devised this lesson on, how do you build your own scale, and then how do you use it to then collect information, collect data, and then analyze it from there. So I think those were kind of
So
different pieces.
while everybody else was running around trying to find toilet paper, you were actually doing some meaningful work with students over there. That's very good. Speaking of the pandemic too, I was looking at your social media initiatives, and you created something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's to motivate people. What do you call it?
Got it. Oh, that was my executive functioning
Executive function.
program.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, yes.
Yeah. So
That,
that,
yeah,
yeah.
go on. Mhm.
Oh, okay. So that was interesting. So that was an initiative that started probably around like 5 or 6 years ago. So I'll be
Oh,
honest, I was being lazy and I was like, I need a summer job, but I
yeah.
really don't feel like applying to other things right now. I was going into my second year of teaching at the school that I was at prior. And I saw that there was this gap. So I was previously at Columbia Secondary School here in New York City, and the school is very unique in that it is the only select STEM school that is representative of the diverse margins of New York City. So our priority is to take students who are minorities and give them, preference to coming to this school. And then there's a partnership with Columbia University. Um, with that, I appreciate. I really, it was so unique to be at this great place. But people are coming from very, very different backgrounds, and they didn't have, all of the, I guess to say, the tools that you would receive in a traditional American family. So, we had families who didn't speak English, so it was very hard for them to assist sometimes with the homework. Sometimes, they were busy. Families are working many, many jobs to make sure that there's food put on the table, and they love their children, and they were sacrificing everything to do that. But when they couldn't be around, it was very hard for them to also say, "Hey, like I need you to sit down and do homework." You can shout that as many times as you want to across a phone,
Yes.
but if they're not there to actually see that,
Yeah.
it's very difficult. So the program, that was a gap at our school, and I said, we have the summers. People are, usually not doing a whole lot. Why don't I do something with them so I can teach them kind of these basic executive function skills,
Mhm.
and then they can have those when they actually go back into the classroom, because these are things that we kind of take for granted, putting our
Mhm.
papers in the correct folder, or keeping a planner,
Yeah.
and managing our time. And I think if you're able to get that foundational skill, that will make you more successful. So we implemented it out. It was only supposed to be a summer program, and then my principal was like, how are we putting this into the school year? And I was like,
Oh.
not planning on doing that, but I guess we're gonna go for it. So when, kind of fast forward, when the pandemic hit, we were kind of, all of us, I feel like, we're first year teachers again, first year administrators, first year principals.
Mhm.
And I think it was an opportunity as well to kind of help our parents grow from being a first year teacher, because that's what had to happen at home. So I made these videos to help the students, but also to help the families um, who were also kind of struggling with this new environment. And I wanted to help them, give them some, real life things that they could try out and do.
Mhm.
So that's how that all got
Yeah.
built out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's still going. I'm hoping to, in my new role, I'm hoping to grow this program as well. It is a minor consulting company. There were a couple of schools that had hired me to help build their program. Um,
Yes. Yes.
we have some private clients, so I'm always, I want to get it out there, because I think these are pretty simple tasks. It's just showing you how do you do it.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Simple. Keep it simple. Yeah. I think it's very useful because we also talk to students about executive functioning skills, and we find that a lot of times it's not the ability of the students, but it's the functioning part of it that gets them in trouble or get them not to do well, to turn in papers on time, and so on. Sometimes they actually did the work and didn't turn in
Yeah.
the paper. So it's very good.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
very.
interesting too. I think I have a student, he's coming from a Spanish speaking family.
Mhm.
And what I realize is that he's super, super smart, but he already comes in at a disadvantage
Mhm.
because he's not hearing kind of the American vocabulary, that higher
Yes,
level vocab at home.
right.
So even though he's super capable,
Mhm.
um, if he's not getting that exposure even to the smallest extent, he's already, a little behind. So I think,
Yeah,
you know, being able
yeah.
to help with that is really key.
Mhm. So, Dr. Barker, that's a very good question you asked her because the background really set her up to what she's going to do. And I'm telling you, in the program in SPA Principal Academy, it's really it geared towards helping people yeah, function in schools in a way that you see what's happening on every level, so including students with problems, teachers building relationships. And so it's not just the infrastructure of the school, physical infrastructure, but also the social infrastructure and the culture and so on, to make sure that everything is holistic and running like a fine-tuned machine.
Yeah, and I just want to add a little bit to that as well. It is geared towards principals, administrators, and so forth. But some of our graduates do go into consulting. We have actually one of our classmates is working at an educational curriculum firm, and she's building curriculum. And I think that is what the students are learning, and it's a it's a really cool place. And they recognize the value, I think, of the spa degree. They actually didn't have a role specifically for her, but they were like, wow, we looked at this project you submitted, and we saw that you had gone through this very rigorous program. So we don't really know what the role formally is quite yet, but we're going to figure it out, and we want you on there. So she ended up with a job, not necessarily for admin, but still in the education field, making a change. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah. No, fascinating. I'm sorry. And one thing that I'm immediately struck with, Colette, is just your enthusiasm, just the way that you communicate. And I struggle to think that people in your presence would find the message that you're sharing, anything less than motivating and inspiring. It certainly is something that at some point in your life you may have. I suppose my question is to kind of go back into and look at you and yourself, and when you reflect, again, my question is a kind of looking in the rearview mirror, but it's also to understand where your inspirations come from, right? So I suppose I'm trying to understand is, when did you realize that you have this kind of enthusiasm and this gift also to articulate a thought in your head and bring people along with you?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never really fully thought about that. But I think, I try to think about the times when like it's been really difficult in my life, when I had to, when I struggled in school. There was a part, teaching was actually my backup plan. I never intended on going into education. I was like, 9 to 5 job, let me be done with it. I actually, prior to being a teacher, was interested in being a physician assistant. Sciences were really big for me. And I was in a program where the education was just so terrible. I was in a program where, it was just adjunct faculty. It was people who, hadn't necessarily gained any skills in just even pedagogy. And I think that's, I think many people assume, oh, I can be a teacher. I got this. And they throw them into the classroom and they're like, oh my God, what is this? And I think at that point, when I went through that, I was just like, wow, this is like so not okay. Um, because it one reflects on like the poor education. You're not training people well, which then when you put them out into the field, that's not gonna it's not gonna do any good. You're putting people who are not really prepared to be in whatever field that is. For me, it was being in physician assistant school. Like I'm supposed to operate and I'm not really sure where everything is supposed to be, or where I'm supposed to, do a surgery. So that's not good. And I think there were barriers around how that program was done, that really hindered making someone the best they could be. So that kind of inspired me, like, wow, education is really so important. And I think that's where my enthusiasm came into the education world. So that was kind of my start in, okay, I'm going to become a teacher, because I think, I can see like we need better quality, not just even in our middle elementary school. It's global. And I think as I got into the education world, I got to see where a lot of the gaps were happening. New York City at times had said, we need to fix the specialized high schools. And I'm thinking, I don't, it's not, you have to go back. You can't just all of a sudden say, we're going to fix high school. By then it's almost too late. And kind of with that executive function program that I was doing, you have to start these skills when students are very, very, very young, so that they start practicing and building a foundation. So I think the frustrating part is seeing, once I got into education, kind of, what are the politics around schools and education? You know, who are we putting into these positions to
Yeah.
lead and make decisions? Another part of is that, and this goes back to, again, part of my parent training with the executive function program is how do we help people be more advocates for our students?
Mhm.
And you know, I don't think schools should take on the responsibility of teaching parents. I think teachers are taxed,
Mhm.
administrators are taxed with so much already, but I think it's worth the long-term investment to do that. Because for me, I saw it as this is going to take a lot of front loading. But if I teach a parent how to help a student be an advocate at home, they're going to keep doing the same things I do so that the kid is hearing it in multiple environments so that they eventually get that exposure. And hopefully by the end of it, they're able to do it. And I did see that in some of the preliminary data that we collected, which was really, really great. Another aspect of that program that I saw was really, really important for me at my school. The coaches who actually taught that program were our paraprofessionals. And I wanted to, for me, give them another role. I will say that at, you know, my school, um, I personally don't think they were treated as well as they could be. And there are these very capable people who had so much experience, who were excellent at executive functioning, and they were traveling with students to all of their classes. So being able to give them another role, and then here we are with another advocate, and then teachers saw, oh, I can get them to help me talk to the parents, or I can, you know, share the work of which
Mhm.
there's so much to do already. So I think being able to bring them into that as well,
Yeah.
and looking for those openings. So I guess, you know, when you're kind of hard hit with something that's so difficult,
Mhm.
for me, I try to look at it as an opportunity to say, okay, well, this was really terrible. And I kind of, my philosophy is, well, can only go up from here if it's really this bad. And I try to use that to say, okay, it can get better, and, you know, do something about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really, really cool. And it's practical. It's not like somebody who says that you know, my fifth grade teacher inspired me or so on. It's that angle that you take to correct something. It's kind of like the
Yeah.
question, Dr. Barker. We talk about this already. Like what would you want, what problems would you want to solve in the world? Not what you would want to become, but what problems you want to solve in the world. And then what stems off from that is your goals, your life goals. And it reminds me, when you talk, that reminds me of the problems that we want to solve, that purpose, the purpose driven life.
That's a
Yeah.
great way of framing it. I've never thought of
Yeah.
it that way. And we should ask that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah. Yeah, because if you become a policeman, that's a thing. It's an end in itself. There's no, you probably fit into one of the little cubes that they create for you in society. And if you become a medical doctor, that's already created already, and you fit into that thing. So you actually have to unlearn certain things or become less creative to fit into that role. Whereas if we look at the problems that we would want to solve in the 21st century, then that gives us a plethora of things that we can focus on and actually bring our own original creativity to the table. So yeah, so it's remarkable if we start focusing on students' creativity and help them to develop. Your start. We weren't even gonna go this angle with executive functioning, but teaching kids how to manage their own time and talent and so on, it actually helped them to to maintain their creativity and help them to build their own originality, instead of educating them out of their creativity. It's good. It's very good. Tell us, you do music, and you actually played in some really, really fascinating places. So give us, we talk about your approach to ed leadership and what caused you to be here. Give us the other side of Dr. Young with the musical talent that you have and where you have been with that part.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so growing up, my mom is actually a musician. She's amazing. She was a Juilliard trained concert pianist. So growing up, I was so lucky to be exposed to so much music. Every almost every day there's like rehearsals going on. my mom's like, we're going to this both my parents love music. My dad is an avid fan of the opera. He goes to the ballet. Sometimes
So
I'm
hold
like,
on.
I don't want
So,
to.
but I'm bringing in Dr. Barker here. You're gonna continue. Dr. Barker, can you imagine growing up in that house? Every you're hearing, it's like being around Bob Marley all the time. You're tired of the guitar. Go on, Dr. Young.
Yeah, no, it was really great. I was so lucky to meet, like, again, like some of the best people in the field. And I got my mom kind of, when you're little, your parents force you into things. So, you
Yeah.
take piano and you're like, oh, I don't want to practice. But somewhere along the way, my siblings and I became appreciative of that. And I think that exposure is what really got me interested. The challenging part is that here we don't, it's very hard to make a career out of being a musician. I think my parents wanted for me to, keep it going, but also like to be realistic. They didn't want to see me have to live from audition to audition, which, I, I really applaud those that go ahead and do that because I'm like, I I want to make sure I have a steady job and know that there's an income coming in. But music has really helped me throughout my life. I think it taught me things like discipline. It taught me how to be creative. And when I got to college, I was like, oh, I can't choose. So I just kind of kept both music and then science. And my dad is in the sciences. And that's where the science influence I think came
Yeah,
from.
yeah,
But
yeah.
he again like loves the arts, and I think the creativity from that is what kind of kept him going through that. But anyway, we got to college, couldn't choose. Then when I was graduating, I had some really big auditions, and then I also had the other route of going into the science. So then I chose science, and I was hoping to actually become a PA working specifically on like ENT stuff, so things that had to do with like the vocal cords and training. When that didn't fan out, when that didn't pan out, I applied to Columbia. I got into the science program, and then I was like, oh well, I want to make sure I have a job, so let me make sure I have not only science, but I'll put music in there as well so that, if they need a science and music teacher, I can do both to try to make myself more marketable. And then, it's something that for me has always been intertwined and interdisciplinarily together. So I've kind of kept it through. So, I still perform. I'm a semi-professional singer. My training was originally in classical music and opera, and then it's kind of grown into Broadway. I love love the tunes, and I think I try to remain flexible. So if there's a fun gig out there, whether they need me at singing the national anthem at like a Columbia game, but I've been so lucky to perform at the Kennedy Center. I've also performed out in Salt Lake City, at Temple Square, out in Honolulu, where my family is actually from. Kind of like the islands and the nice
Yeah,
weather
yeah,
and
yeah.
beautiful
Yes, yes.
atmosphere and the kind of welcoming environment. But yeah, and through this, I've actually, through some of my education, have actually been kind of attractive to kind of those music positions. So the Kennedy Center actually runs an amazing program for students with disabilities. It's called VSA. And it was actually started by Jean Kennedy Smith because the Kennedys had a sister who had a disability, and
Right.
she wanted, to establish. And I don't know the whole history, but definitely in her name established this program through the Kennedy Center. So I've done little conferences with them. Sometimes they send me out. One time they sent me to Maryland to celebrate Education Day, and I was the singer for the programming that was happened. So that was really, really cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then I got to at Christmas time twice got to sing at the White House, which was really beautiful. Oh my goodness, I highly recommend traveling and if anyone gets a chance to see it at Christmas time. Oh, all the Christmas trees, all the themes, and just being kind of in the presence and remembering, we're a very great country here in the United States, and we have so much to offer and so many tools. And I think what we need to do next is, as you were talking about. Dwayne, about what are the next steps, like what are we doing? Don't ask what occupation do you want, what are we going to do? I think how do we take the resources we have, how do we make our schools better, how do we prepare our administrators, how do we get like the best people to come into our field to help that next generation?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. There's people constantly moving the needle, you know.
Yeah.
So, Colette, you work. So I think you mentioned that the Columbia gig is kind of like a side hustle, right? Am I correct? Is that
Kind of fun stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So in your day-to-day work, you're still functioning as a school leadership, and as you said, an assistant principal. What was it?
Oh, so this actually was a recent change. So I'm now at Columbia full time in the
Okay.
assistant director role.
Oh,
For the
okay.
summer principals account, yeah, no, that is full time. Prior to that, I was the dean of students at that school, Columbia Secondary School. So I was there
Oh,
all
okay.
all for
Okay.
9 years. Yeah.
Okay. So you're now in this role. You made a reference just back, and I want to take us back a little bit to that. You mentioned that emerging from the pandemic, you made the comment that we're actually first year principals, first year. I think that's my understanding of that was that's what I got from it. So I suppose my question, given that you're going to be in a role where you're going to be shaping leaders of the future, who will be shaping leaders of the future, right?
Mhm.
And I suppose my question is one, I think the first part I'd like to ask is you personally, since you consider every year since the pandemic as almost a new year of leading, what did you learn personally about yourself as you came through the pandemic? And as you like now, I mean, even a year on, what would you say you do differently since that?
Yeah. I think for me, I have become more of a flexible person. I was definitely someone, and I think, my upbringing has contributed to, like, here's the process, here are the steps, let's just go. Like, here's the plan, follow it. And I think I think it's very important to have a plan. And that was one part of the pandemic because everyone's like, what do we do? What do we do? I don't know what to do. And people freaked out. I freaked out at times, like, I don't know what to do. I've never done this before. So I think having a plan in place is really good, but then being flexible to it. So I think, the world has very much changed in terms of how are we delivering information. It used to be every month there's a PTA meeting and you be there in person. Now it's there's a Zoom meeting. Let's make sure we know how to work the Zoom and, like, be able to bring everyone in. I think also I think the pandemic really uncovered some of the gaps in terms of how students get information. We learned that a lot of students don't have internet, don't necessarily have computers. I had students typing papers on their cell phones, and uncovering that was really, really big. And I think, how do we fix those things again, especially in a place where we have the resources to do that? So I think, how do, as a educator, as an administrator, how do I help my colleagues do that? How do I train people to say, where do we look for the resources? Where are the grants? How do I teach you how to write a grant so that you can get what you need to do? I think those skills are very, very important. And I think, being open and flexible to learning new things. I have had, in my new role, have had to learn how to tweet and use Instagram. And yeah, that's been exciting. One
Yeah.
day I think I'll get there. But the world is, as we say, the world is going to keep moving on. It's going to keep evolving, and if you don't evolve with it, you are going to get left behind. And I don't want to see that, especially for administrators, for teachers, for students. I don't want that to happen because you're going to miss something along the way. So for me, like, that's been the biggest, biggest learning, I think, hurdle.
That's
Yeah,
it.
you kind of mentioned the idea of just now, you talked about the not being left behind. And I'm going to take it a little bit forward now and maybe more current, There's an elephant in the room in terms of every educational setting at the moment. And I'd be certainly be surprised if this isn't a topic of discussion in your space. And this is the influence of AI in education, particularly the recent release of Chat GPT and how that may impact schooling, conception of education, and whether it's good or bad. I know you might not be speaking on behalf of Columbia University, but tell me your thoughts on Chat GPT and similar programs that are on the market and certainly would be here to stay.
You
It's a
know,
good
it's
question.
it's it's that kind of um that hurdle you have with technology. Like it's really, really great and it can do so many wonderful things, but is it now taking our ability to think and be smart and be creative? So I think for me, just kind of on the baseline of like seeing these programs work, how you can just type a question and it'll really shoot out an answer. My fiance was showing me, he's in tech, and he was like, "Look at this thing. Kids are totally going to use this." I was like, "Oh, great!" But
Mm.
I think it's coming, and I think our question is, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to use it to our benefit? You can't stop. It's kind of, Wikipedia, I think, is a little bit like that. You are not going to stop people from looking up information on Wikipedia. So how do we at least make it better, or how do we make this resource something that they can use for better? I don't, I'm not a tech person, and I know that these things can seems like are on the verge of like literally spitting out papers. So how do we then maybe say, how do we take that information, or how do we create programs that are going to help students actually, and how do we shape that, how do we present that to them and saying, I get that you could easily type this in and that you're going to get something, but like here are maybe the other ways of why we do that. How do we explain to you why it's so important to do research and do it yourself, and the process, because we don't know what's coming next. Maybe
Mm.
we'll be in another pandemic and the internet crashes. You're not
Mm.
going to have that to spit it out. And
Mm.
the ones who are going to survive are going to be the ones who learn the skill set. So I think framing is very, very important. I think that goes with anything. And I think even kind of looking at technology and social media, like kids want to be like the people they see. They want to be like their parents. They do want to be like their teachers. And if you're setting the example of, oh yeah, okay, I'm busy on my phone, don't talk to me, they're going to do the same thing. And I think, so I think framing it to students, framing it to parents, framing it to teachers, and then I think the other aspect of it is like you can't avoid it. So how are we going to at least use it for better? I mean, if you're at least going to sit there and do it in front of me, do it in front of me. Now take a pen and a paper and write it out. And I
Mm.
don't think it's a bad thing to necessarily go back to, I guess, what we would consider the old ways of schooling, of taking a paper and a pencil and writing it down or outlining it. There are other ways to like prove that you know what's going on and know what to do. And I think, it was interesting. There was an incident where I was using our school was using a program, and there was a breach, and then the school and other individuals involved decided not to renew the contract, but we were left with no system. So the system did like our grade recording, had contact information. So for me, I was like, well, I guess it's time, like, going back to manually writing it down. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes people delete files, sometimes people send a file and you never get it. But,
Mm.
you can't argue if something is like written right there and that you have that track record. And I think, there's certain skills that are very important to do. There has been research shown that like actually taking notes by hand is
Mhm.
better than typing it. It
Yep,
helps you
sorry.
remember it. So I think, remembering and, you know, not getting allured away by this like nice technology, because it's beautiful. I mean, I I have the iPad, I have the computer, I have all of these fun tech things, and it's just so easy. Um,
Mhm.
but I think sometimes we have to remember, like, we need to make it a little hard so that we learn that process, so that we can still be successful as the world turns.
Mhm. So we don't become vegetables.
Right, right.
Dr. Barker, Dr. Young, we're winding down our program, and it's been fun talking to you. I think we're gonna, when the year progresses, we're gonna get you to be on here with some discussions to talk about leadership. Ed leadership. Because what we're looking at too with Dr. Barker in England, we can even look at how things are progressing there in terms of leadership in schools, and then what's happening here with even teacher training and ed leadership in at the tertiary level too.
Yeah,
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Some collaborating. I think that's so key.
yeah. Dr. Barker.
I maybe want to invite Dr. Colette Young, and I'm going to send something to her because
Mhm.
I'm currently in the middle of editing a book called, the title of the book is A Handbook of Research on Critical Issues and Global Trends in International Education. The call for chapters are out now with an intended, so I'm collecting proposals at the moment, and I'm getting a lot of interest in this. But it's maybe something to think about, simply because they're, the kind of programs that you're offering, quite likely there might be people who are even leaving those programs to go and work internationally, or are bringing ideas of working internationally into those programs. And even the ideas of these, summer principal academies as a way in which we can get training in some areas. So I'll send the call for chapters, and
Please do. That's amazing.
Strongly about. I'm also, so yeah, I'll send the call for chapters out, and you can maybe see if it's something you could. But secondly, one of the reasons why I would like to share it with you as well is whether you'd share that in your network as well. Because one of the things I hope is that, all the people who need to know of this call for chapters are aware of it, so that the book represents the broadest, the broadest opinions and the broadest ideas and views, and so people can actually see it as a go-to guide for their research and for further planning. So I'm going to send that to you. I don't think I'll send it to you, Dice, and then you can forward it.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll put my email in the chat
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
That's good. Yeah, put it in there. And so Dr. Young, there's one, usually we ask a final question, before we close off. And the question I wanted to ask you is, what keeps you up at night? Especially we're starting the new year, so we want to find out what's gonna, keep you up after midnight this year.
That's a good question. I operate really well, like really, really late at night. So that's when I start kind of, my brain power starts going. I don't know if it's like, I feel like everyone else is kind of going to bed and I'm like, great, now I have like time to myself to think.
Yeah.
So recently what's been keeping me up at night is I'm doing a few research projects. So that's been, because I'm like, I have time to kind of think, and I'm like, oh wait, I have an idea. So then I can kind of start acting on it. And then I still, I try to be involved with the prior school that I was at, because I really loved the school. There were some changes that were happening that didn't quite align, but I still am very connected with the students and the families. So that's when I also kind of get work done for them. So I've been doing some grant writing to help them get resources that they need. Yesterday, our cheerleaders performed at Columbia at their basketball game. So I've been kind of tearing up their routine and being like, oh, they need to fix this and do that. So that's usually what kind of keeps me going. Once in a while, there's like a TV show where I'm like, oh, I want to catch up and watch that.
Yeah.
So I know Emily in Paris dropped, and I love that show. So I'm, catching up on that and the She-Hulk.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on EduTalk, and thank you, listeners and viewers, for watching. Dr. Barker, as usual, I'm not thanking you because I'll see you again next week, sharing the platform. Dr. Colette Young, amazing leader, amazing musician, and making waves, and continue. You're going to make bigger waves in the leadership sphere of education. Thank you so much, and we're going to talk soon.
Yes, thank you for having me. I had so much fun.
Yes,
Getting to know you guys
Thank you
even
for
more
coming
too.
on. Great conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Everyone, this has been EduTalk, and we'll see you next week. I'm glad you enjoyed this. And we will talk. We have months in the making in this year to create change. Thank you so much, and talk to you next week on another show. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.